Hi guys, we're here today to talk about OT intervention for children with PANS and PANDAS. Now make sure you stick around to the end because I take you through the different types of interventions that OTs need to be using during remission and during exacerbation phases of this condition. I'm Michelle Newby and I'm from Stepping Up. Hi guys, we are here today to talk about a little known diagnosis called PANS and how occupational therapists can support these children. Now, PANS is sometimes referred to as PANDAS, but the most up-to-date terminology for this condition is PANS. And PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. And if you want to learn more about this condition, I'm going to pop some links down in the comments so you can click on that and learn some more about this condition. But today I'm going to talk through how we as occupational therapists support these children and their fluctuating needs. So I've drawn a little picture here, nice little picture, to help clarify the presentation of these children and then how occupational therapists can help these children at different stages within their condition. So what we tend to see with children with PANS is that they'll track along at their baseline. So this green line here is baseline. That's their baseline level of function. So children with PANS, they might be typically developing children. And so they're able to do all the typical things that, say a 10-year-old can do. And then they're exposed to a trigger and things will change. But it's not just typically developing children. You might have a child who has like an ASD level 1 diagnosis. And so this green line here is their ASD level 1 baseline. So they're tracking along, their performance is at the expected level for their specific situation. So what we see is they're tracking along at their baseline and then they're exposed to a trigger. So this trigger, and the trigger you can see here is represented by this little red asterisk. So this trigger might be like a cold, like a common cold, or it could be the flu, it might be like strep throat, it could be any kind of infection. There are other triggers, other environmental triggers that are harder to pinpoint, but it might be, we've had children who have gone on holidays and stayed in a moldy caravan and that has triggered an exacerbation. So there's lots of different triggers. It's good to kind of learn a little bit more about this condition so you can be aware. But so the child is tracking along at their baseline and then they're exposed to a trigger. So, the common cold, for example. And what we then see is an overnight, like a sudden deterioration in their performance. So that's this black line. So they're tracking along at baseline and then all of a sudden what we tend to see is there's a lot of OCD. OCD is a part of the diagnostic criterion for PANS. So they might start to become very rigid in their behaviors and very sort of fixated on certain patterns or ways of being. And that can just look like lots of meltdowns. They might be having intrusive thoughts. And so it can be tricky to kind of figure out that they do have OCD, but they're having this behavioral manifestation. These children can also have like a sudden deterioration in school performance. They might have a deterioration in their motor performance. So they might be able to, their handwriting at baseline might be really legible and easy to understand, but actually all of a sudden after exposure to this trigger, their handwriting is really illegible. Same with their gait. You might notice changes in their gait. They might look a little bit ataxic, or they might not have their balance might not be as sort of developed as it was at that baseline. We also see things like sleep disruption and urinary frequency. So we might see changes in incontinence. So a lot of these kids are coming into OT clinics without that original diagnosis of PANS yet, because no one's really been able to see it for what it actually is. So yeah, they're tracking along typically, they're triggered, they have this sudden and unexpected deterioration in their performance. And then what we tend to see is there's this slow convalescence period. So you can see here with this blue line is representing a gradual return back to their baseline performance. And then it continues. So then they're at their baseline, they're exposed to a trigger, we have another exacerbation. And there's different patterns that we see in children with PANS, but this is the most typical pattern that we see here at Stepping Stones, is this relapsing, remitting pattern. And so as occupational therapists, what we do need to be aware of this pattern, and we need to be aware of how we can support children at different stages. Now, what I'm going to talk about now is really based on the amazing work of an occupational therapist from the US, from Buffalo, and her name is Janice Toner, and she has written a number of publications looking at PANS and occupational therapy and how OTs can support these kiddos. So check her out. I'll put some of her references in the comments below. So what Janice Toner recommends we do is we have a bit of a paradigm shift as occupational therapists, because when we go in to assess a child, we kind of just expect that assessment will be indicative of that child's performance over time, and they'll improve hopefully with intervention and maturation. But with kids with PANS, it's actually a little bit different, because what we're seeing is this deterioration. So what we want to do is, as they deteriorate down here, we know that their brain is actually quite inflamed at this bottom point. And so when you've got a child whose brain is inflamed, it's not a good time to try and remediate skills or teach new skills. So down here, when they're unwell, we want to use a compensatory approach for these kids. We want to compensate for the things that they're struggling to do. So if they're having difficulties with handwriting legibility down here, we're going to try and compensate for that. We're not going to teach them handwriting, because that's not going to be effective, and it's probably going to be quite frustrating for that kiddo. So we're going to compensate. It might be that they need a scribe for a while, or if they can use word processing, then we would move towards that. Down here at this level, they need a lot of support. So what you're going to do is you're going to be coaching the parents around what kind of expectations they can have of that child's performance while they're unwell. So the parents need to decrease their expectations of what that kiddo can actually do at that time. We just need to compensate and adapt to help them participate as much as possible, but not challenge them too much. So it's, the just right challenge. We do want to challenge them, but we don't want to challenge them too much. We often see a lot of sensory sensitivities really exacerbated when they're in this period of unwellness. And so we're thinking about our sensory diets and how we can support, integration of sensations through our sensory diet down here. As they go through this convalescence period here, so this blue line, it's a bit of a therapy dance that we do. So we need to each time we go to see that child, we meet the child where they're at. So you might see them and they might be ready for a bit of remediation. So you might jump in with some remediation, but you're really thinking about that just right challenge, and you're grading it back as you need it, or grading it forward as you need. So that's what's happening here. And then once they get back up to their baseline, what you're doing is you're looking for any residual symptoms. So what we often see here at Stepping Stones is that as they've recovered, we often see still a lot of attentional challenges, finding it very tricky to filter out external stimuli. And so we'll do some work around that up here. Handwriting can still lag depending upon what their individual symptoms are. So we might do some handwriting remediation. But yeah, we'll just look to remediate when they're back at baseline any of the residual symptoms that they have. And so then they might go along for a little while and actually not need us. So it's okay for them to step away from the service if they don't need us at that time. But knowing that the presentation of this condition means that when they have another exposure, they may well have another exacerbation. And so we need to be agile in the services that we provide so that we can, when they're sort of down here, we can jump back in and help to support these children and their families. So that's treatment for children with PANS in a nutshell. And like I say, I'm going to add some more information in the comments below for you to find out more about this really important condition and how OTs can help. So I hope you liked today's video. If you did, give us a like, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.